This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Following tonight's presidential debate, I will likely debate my cat on why she can't run outside without a chaperone. Here's what we got for y'all. On debate night, we're asking how much room is there for facts and fact-checking? And how do we make sure what's being said on stage is actually true? Plus, a new original series from Newsy takes a data-driven look at the role of Black women in the national conversation on policing and race. But first, here's what you need to know. The Kentucky Attorney General says he'll release the grand jury's deliberations in the Breonna Taylor case, something that could shed light on lingering questions. According to court filings, an unnamed juror said they never got the option to indict the two officers who shot and killed Taylor. But that's not how it was explained during last week's press conference.
Our investigation showed, and the grand jury agreed, that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in the return of deadly fire after having been fired upon.
The unnamed juror says the 12-member panel was only presented with possible charges for Detective Brett Hankinson, whom they did find guilty of wanton endangerment. That charge did not have to do with Taylor's death.
My client wants to make sure the truth gets out. My client wants to make sure that anything that happened in there becomes something of public knowledge to the extent it's legally allowed to.
In a statement Monday, Cameron said the grand jury is meant to be a secretive body, but it is apparent that the public interest in this case isn't going to allow that to happen.
It's very emotional, and I'm scared for myself, I'm scared for my friends.
It's no secret that the airline industry has been hit hard during the pandemic, but things are about to get even worse. More than 35,000 airline workers could face furloughs starting as early as Thursday. That's because a federal stimulus law that stopped airlines from furloughing employees expires on October 1st. While travel has picked up a bit, TSA figures show it's still down about 70% compared to last year. This week, airline CEOs are making one last plea to lawmakers for help.
Please, Congress, we need you to do your job, and we need you to do it now.
An in-depth investigation into the president's financial situation has also raised national security concerns. According to the New York Times, President Trump is personally liable for debts and loans totaling $421 million, and most of it is due in the next 4 years. That amount of debt is concerning to many legal experts who say it could be used as leverage to blackmail or influence the president, especially since it's unclear who holds these loans. A large amount of unresolved debt is something that can actually prevent federal employees from gaining a security clearance. The new evidence only adds to the suspicions of congressional Democrats who say Trump's approach to foreign policy is based around enriching himself and his businesses. Records show that Trump has continued to make money off foreign investments and projects while in office. Trump has already dismissed the reports as fake news. What makes a good presidential debate moderator? Leading up to 2020, there have only ever been 19 different presidential debate moderators. That's fewer people than players on a field during a football game. That makes you realize how we're still figuring out this politics on TV thing. And all those moderators have faced the same sort of question. Should a moderator also be a fact checker? The co-chair of the Commission on Presidential Debates, the organization that's run all the presidential debates since 1988, says, nah.
We don't expect Chris or our other moderators to be fact checkers. The minute the TV is off, there are going to be plenty of fact checkers in every newspaper and every television station in the world. That's not the main role of our moderators.
The commission says it's the candidate's job to point out the BS in each other's arguments.
Not true, Governor Romney.
So how much did you cut him by?
Not true.
So basically the onus is on everybody except for the night's moderator. And that raises another key question. Is that kind of free-for-all a good thing? This might not surprise you that politicians sometimes have a tenuous relationship with the truth. And without at least some kind of fact-checking, whether from the moderator, the candidates, or on-screen graphics, the modern political debate can easily become the Super Bowl of political falsehoods. Basically a 90-minute nationally televised platform for lying. So what's the solution? And actually, is there a solution? Let's look at these options, starting with the moderator themselves stepping in, which can go poorly, like this infamously confusing fact check from Candy Crowley in 2012.
It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape. to come out. You're correct about that.
Or it can be handled a bit more efficiently and still get you booed by the audience, like with John Dickerson in 2016.
Is it appointing or confirming? What's the difference?
In this case, it's both, but if I could answer the question.
Sorry, I just want to get the facts straight for the audience. I apologize.
But our personal favorite approach was this from New York Times editor Max Frankel, delivering the most understated fact check of all time by really just asking Gerald Ford to repeat something everybody knew was wrong.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence?
For a less personal but somewhat more blunt approach, some networks will turn to on-screen graphics to fact-check the candidates. This at least give the viewers some key context, and God knows it's more useful than the old real-time voter approval trends we used to see. And then there's the option of fact-checking post-debate, which is generally what we'll see, if anything, during this election cycle. Even if it means you have to train as an auctioneer to get through it all in a couple of minutes.
More than 20 false or misleading claims. Trump claimed, as always, that he is the one who passed the Veterans' Choice Law. Barack Obama signed that into law in 2014. He didn't mention, as usual, that that gain follows a record 22 million job loss. Trump said, "I have done more for the African-American community than any president since Abraham Lincoln." That is ludicrous.
Now, Newsy is obviously serving up some valuable context throughout this election, but whether it's through us or somewhere else, the best thing you can do to make sure you're getting the facts is to just double check what a candidate is saying, preferably with multiple sources. We all know you'll be on your phone during the debates anyway. Black women who are victims of police violence are still being underreported.
We're working hard to get you the news you need.
We dig a little deeper on the stories of the day.
That's why we're here.
To help start making sense of it all.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
After the killing of Breonna Taylor, protesters recycled a popular refrain to ensure that her death would not be forgotten. Say her name. Black women like Taylor are killed by police at a disproportionately high rate. But aside from Taylor, all the highest profile cases are unknown to most of the public and often overlooked by media. Our new series Data Log unpacks data journalism through conversations on a range of hot button topics. In our first episode, Newsy's Alex Travis examines the numbers that show, even during a wave of protests for racial justice this year, we still don't say her name.
Police brutality and race are at the center of some of the biggest conversations happening across the U.S.
Marches and calls for justice over police-involved incidents involving black men.
Protests across the country over videos showing the deaths of black men at the hands of police.
So often, black men are vilified.
But often left out of that conversation are black women who, like black men, are killed by police at a disproportionately high rate. And we found that the highest profile police killings of black women in recent years only got about 8% of the coverage that killings of black men received. These numbers shed some light on how we still don't say her name, and they show that whether the victim is a man or a woman, the big factor in police violence is still race.
My name is Katrina Johnson. I am the first cousin of Charlena Lyles. On June 18, 2017, my cousin called the police for help to report a burglary. And the dash cam video shows the officers, she was killed. She was shot 7 times. At the most, she had a paring knife. And so even if that was the case, why was the result death?
Victims of police violence like Charlena are real people with real stories. So, take a minute. Which of these names do you recognize? These are all names of high-profile victims of police violence. But through a Newsy Ipsos survey, we found that some names are more recognizable than others. Overall, people are much less familiar with the victims on this list who are women. And most people say they haven't heard anything at all about the highest profile cases of black women killed by police, aside from Breonna Taylor. To understand why, we took a closer look at how these cases are covered. And to do that, we enlisted the help of Newsy data reporter Rosie Chima.
Hi, Rosie. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, thanks for including me.
So yeah, we used the Say Her Name campaign and a report that they published in a big way to kind of look into their main focus of what kind of coverage are Black female victims of police violence receiving. So we went through those 5 of the most trafficked news outlets and compared their coverage of Black female victims post-Ferguson to 9 very well-known male victims from that same time period.
Yeah, and based on the number of articles that they appeared in, Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland were by far the most well-known women on our list. Before this year, it was almost definitely Sandra Bland. She died in police custody in 2015. And we found almost 900 stories that mentioned her. But before this year, the most well-known male victim was Michael Brown, and there were 7,000 stories that mentioned him.
That is a huge disparity.
Also now the most well-known victim of police violence in the world, maybe of all time, is George Floyd. And his name appears in over 9,000 stories. And if we add up the 21 most well-known female victims in our data set, they appear in about 2,500 stories. And when you compare 9,000 to 2,500, that means that all of those female victims together got less than 1/3 as much coverage than a single male victim.
Research shows that if we look at gender and race together, Black women are the group who are most likely to be killed by police when unarmed of any group, including Black men. And that illuminates kind of how deeply entrenched perceptions of Black women as inherently dangerous, deranged, threatening, animalistic.
And that impacts people when they are being policed, in addition to how police officers see Black spaces. So I think there's this perception of who Black women are and the types of spaces that they reside in also are often criminalized. Police violence against Black women since the 1980s has gotten worse.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
The folks that are largely impacted by those drug rates tend to be Black women and their children.
I'm laying there screaming, asking somebody to help my granddaughter because he just shot her in the head.
The case of Ayanna Stanley in Detroit, she was shot in the head by Detroit police officers because of a raid. And this is what we see in the Breonna Taylor case, right? You see the police actually just going in, kicking a door in and not asking any types of questions.
Everybody there said they never heard the police identify themselves.
And then the folks who are in that house are not expected to protect themselves.
I was just wondering what it's been like for you and your family since Charlena was killed.
To be perfectly honest, it has been an absolute nightmare. It's been 3 years and we don't even really know what happened, why it had to happen, and what you could have done differently. How do you heal? How do you move on? How do you begin to pick up the pieces of your life, knowing that it's already never going to be the same?
Let's take a quick breather. We'll get started again as soon as you're back. The U.S. Refugee Program was established to help resettle some of the world's most vulnerable refugees. But under President Trump's administration, the U.S. has admitted the lowest number of refugees since the 80s. Newsy's Austin Landis tells us about Iraqi allies who worked with the U.S. military and are largely being forgotten by a country that promised an immigration opportunity.
This year, the U.S. has admitted the lowest number of refugees ever. Some of the tens of thousands waiting are people who were made a promise from the U.S. military, put their lives on the line to help our troops, and they'd get help to seek safety in the U.S. But that promise has largely been broken.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you.
See you, let me put the lights on.
His face is blurred and his voice altered because he's worried people who want to kill him will track him down.
I don't drive my car on the same road twice a day. I use different roads. I always look in my review mirrors. I'm careful when I leave, who take with me, and who to let know where I'm going.
He asked to go by Wolf, his nickname in the early 2000s when he worked for the U.S. military in Iraq.
An interpreter is the backbone of the operations.
The U.S. made him a promise, a path to live in America. It's a promise his life still depends on.
They consider us as traitors. My first threat, they came to my family's house. They told them, we know where he actually works, and we will shoot him on spot if he doesn't quit.
Because of their work for the U.S., local militias are still targeting Iraqi interpreters like Wolf.
Their wait time is not months or years. If you're an Iraqi who applies to this program today, your wait time is really in centuries.
Iraqi translators are given special treatment within the U.S. refugee program. Last year, the administration even went a step further, setting aside 4,000 spots specifically for people like Wolf. But of those 4,000, Newsy found just 123 have been filled, and tens of thousands of translators and their families are still waiting.
Across Congress, across the administration, across the Pentagon, everybody says they support this program, but there's been a real failure to translate that ostensible support into action.
It's part of a broader trend under President Trump.
He's promised to flood your state with refugees.
The U.S. admitted just over 10,000 refugees in the past year, the lowest number since the Refugee Act of 1980. The State Department tells Newsy this program is a vital lifeline for the world's most vulnerable refugees who have no other alternative. But the pandemic continues to pose significant logistical challenges to international travel, and the same challenges have halted overseas refugee interviews. But the trend predates the pandemic. The Trump administration has cut the refugee cap every year.
Admissions start declining in the U.S., they start declining in other countries too. So it really sets in motion this kind of domino effect that leads to a real stagnation of people in desperately dangerous situations.
Wolf has already seen the consequences.
They got all the way into bothering my little brother. They didn't even waste a bullet. They ran him over with a car. He stood 6 days in a hospital in a coma and internal bleeding in his head, and then couldn't survive. It's devastating.
Wolf knows his path to safety in the U.S. is uncertain. Reuters reports the Trump administration is considering postponing all refugee admissions this coming year.
Don't be sorry for me. Be sorry for everyone, actually, who went through the same pattern of suffering these years. I cannot sleep without a gun nearby my head or under the pillow. Until now. Now I have kids. I have a wife.
The administration hasn't yet consulted with Congress on future plans, but the final decision will be President Trump's.
We did what we were supposed to do. We made the right choices. We paid our dues. We lost loved ones that they will not come back. I think we deserve a chance.
Advocates say no matter which candidate wins in November, the refugee program will take time to rebuild. Things like processing applications, resettlement services, the entire infrastructure of the program. And they worry this next year's admissions could set even another record low, leaving people like Wolf with nothing to do but wait. Austin Landis, Newsy, Washington.
We're always excited to have you all engage with our show, but it doesn't have to stop here. Feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. And no, I'm not going to apologize for sounding thirsty. Most political debates have enough spin to send anybody reeling. Lucky for you, Newsy has a whole slew of videos taking a look at the candidates' records on a range of subjects, including the hottest of hot-button issues, immigration. Here's our Ben Shamiso with the in-depth look.
President Trump has made reducing immigration a key part of his administration's agenda.
Now, Joe Biden, his Democratic challenger, has promised to quickly roll back most of the president's executive actions and advance his own ambitious immigration platform. The sharp differences and what's at stake is historic.
I don't think we've seen ever before a president put immigration so much at the forefront of his policymaking as President Trump has done.
The president has continued the trend during the pandemic by dramatically restricting legal immigration. In the president's view, fewer foreign workers means less competition for Americans.
It would be wrong and unjust for Americans laid off by the virus to be replaced with new immigrant labor flown in.
Biden says he would overturn President Trump's coronavirus immigration freeze because, quote, immigrants help grow our economy and create jobs. Within the first 100 days of his possible presidency, Biden also wants to end President Trump's travel bans and restrictive asylum policies.
My immigration policy is built around keeping families together.
The former vice president has also committed to pausing deportations for undocumented immigrants already in the country for 100 days.
In the first 100 days of my administration, no one will be deported at all.
Both presidential contenders argued that securing the border is essential, but they disagree on how to go about it. President Trump wants to continue his longtime campaign promise, building a wall along the southern border paid for by Mexico.
We're up to mile 330 on the wall. 330.
Most of the new structures his administration has built so far are taller fences replacing barriers that already existed, paid for entirely by the US government. Biden would stop construction of the border wall, which he calls ineffective and a waste of taxpayers' money. He says he would invest in surveillance technology instead. Most ambitiously, Biden wants to work with Congress to provide a roadmap to citizenship for around 11 million undocumented immigrants. He would also fully reinstate DACA protections for hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants who came to the US as children. Ben Chamisso, Newsy.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. Tomorrow, we'll provide the thoughtful SparkNotes version of what happened during the first presidential debate for those of you who refuse to watch. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.